Greetings, everyone. Good afternoon from Nairobi, Kenya. I'm really happy to have you today for today's session. It is session 3, and I'm joined on by very wonderful colleagues who really, some of them have walked the journey with us since the first session, while others are really happy to join us for the third session today. I think one of the key things that we picked up during the course of the registration and from the participants is that there was a question around what inspired you to do what you're doing currently. And I think it's one of the things that you'll be hearing from each and every one of the speakers as they join on today. So allow me to just quickly walk you through around what this look like. But before then, I want to introduce myself. I'm Samuel Mutisia. I'm the program manager at the African Venture Philanthropy Alliance. Basically, we are an ecosystem builder, a network of social impact investors across Africa, looking to crowd in the social impact investors across the continent of capital. As you can see ahead of you is the program. We'll start off with the welcoming, which I'm doing right now. After this, I'll hand over to my good partner and colleague, Matt Ripley from Impact Frontiers. From there, we'll have a keynote presentation from Yawanda Sosanya. Then we'll have 2 case studies from FSD Africa, Ryan Mwanzui, and from Trevor Noah Foundation, Kuswelo. Then we'll have an opportunity to just undertake interactive discussions. We take note that some of you shared some questions beforehand, and we'll be able to answer those and also spotlight some of those. And then from there, we'll have closing remarks and call to action. So as we start off, there are some ground rules that I want to put forth. So as we start off, first of all, I want to just highlight the ground rules that have already been put forth. I kindly request that you stay on mute. You keep your microphone muted unless you are called to do so. During the course of our discussion, there are some sessions whereby we'll open up the chat, but we encourage you to really utilize the question and answer icon. Then from there, just to alert you that the session will be recorded and we'll be having very interactive calls. And also remember to tag us using the hashtag impact reporting. As I have highlighted, this is session 3 of our webinar series. We have been able to take up 2 sessions previously on presenting on impact performance and the previous session on what to do when things go wrong. This is a collaboration with Impact Frontiers with funding from the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. And in this session, I want, as we start off, to just quickly give you the analogy. I know most of you come from African communities or you're working in African spaces. And the analogy that I want to give you around community voices is around also informed by the question that I was asked, what is inspiring me to do this? And when as a young boy, and I know even for those who are young girls and the rest within the community, there was a time whereby you had to go and fetch water. And when you are fetching water, when you are going with your donkey or with your cat, the jerry cans used to make a lot of noise. But when you were coming back home, when the jerry cans were full, there was no noise. That is the analogy I want you to think about when we are thinking about incorporating the people's voices or community voices. In that, the jerry cans are empty. Think of it as the numbers that really are amplified, the pie chart and all that. But in there, when you have the community voices in there, then there is a silent story that is relatable to everyone that is being told. So as we move forward, that's what I want you to think through. And at this point, even as we discuss around session 3 and also the recap of session 1 and 2, for now, I want to just hand over to Matt Ripley for the opening remarks to be able to recap what we are doing. And after Matt is done, like I outlined in the program, you will have Yawanda, who is the Chief Executive Officer from Strateco. And then we go down to South Africa and hear from Trevor Noah Foundation and Pan-African level from FSD Africa. So I'm really happy to have you today as I hand over to Matt. Please stay with us and make it as interactive as possible. Thank you all. Matt, over to you.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you so much, everybody, for joining once again. It's great to see so many of you back for session 3 of this webinar series. I'd love to start off with a quick poll on screen here. So I'll give you all a few minutes to answer, and if you could select one choice. So how often does your organization integrate the voice of affected communities into its impact reporting? So do you always do this? Do you often do it? Sometimes, rarely, or never? Just a quick straw poll. Give you all a second to respond. And hopefully you should see the pop-up poll come in. So you can just click one of those and submit, and we'll show you the results in about 10 seconds time. Wonderful. So hopefully you can all see the results on screen as well in a pop-up. Just in case you can't, for whatever reason, got a really interesting spread there with about 40% saying that they always do that, and another 40% saying often and sometimes, with a handful saying rarely or never. So you are in the right place today, because this is really what we're going to talk about. Right place for those of you who already do it, to exchange and perhaps learn about some new practices, but also for those who rarely or never consider the voice of affected people and communities in reporting. I hope this will be some inspiration for you to take back to your day job. Before we begin, I'd just like to recap for those who weren't able to join the first couple of sessions. So just to have everyone on the same page, in the first session, we introduced the impact performance reporting norms, which at Impact Frontiers we've been working on as a free open access resource representing a broad consensus on what should be included in an impact report, and also consensus on some principles of how to present impact performance information clearly and credibly. We've been working very much from the perspective that the reporting norms are primarily designed for investors, so impact funds reporting to their capital providers. But we've actually heard they can also be useful as inspiration for any organization reporting on its impact, from social enterprises to nonprofits and beyond. So the usual caveat that we will often refer a lot today to the investment context, but there will be lessons that you can draw out more widely, even if you are not part of an investment value chain. In that first session, we talked about some challenges and opportunities around how to present progress towards intended positive impacts in a way that avoids some common pitfalls. We talked about floating metrics, so thinking through how you're presenting impact data with sufficient context, making that data easier to interpret for readers. And we talked about the issue of flat metrics, thinking about, well, that not all numbers and data points are equal, how to think about the different levels of quality or the strength of evidence in the impact performance information you're putting forward. In the last session, in the second session, we talked about how to report when things don't go to plan. So this is a really crucial and pretty interesting area of reporting, because I think, as most of us know, the journey towards positive change in the context in which we work can be full of many ups and downs, some pretty unexpected. So in the last webinar, we talked about a couple of things. First, well, we heard from our guest presenters in the second webinar, it's pretty difficult to know if things are going wrong or if you're off track if you don't know where you're going. So we talked about the importance of targets, target setting and thresholds for what actually counts as a positive change. But we also talked and openly acknowledged that things sometimes do go wrong. And when an organization is unintentionally causing negative impacts, despite aiming to create positive impacts, there's a couple of things. The first is it's important to be transparent, to openly share these negative impacts and explain how you're measuring and counting or addressing them. But more important than that, to really approach the issue of when things go wrong, not from a mindset of it's bad, let's hide it, but to a learning mindset. So actually shifting to view negative impacts as opportunities to improve and grow, and not just failures to hide, so to speak. And that's certainly something we'll pick up on again today in the context of how you actually find out and know what's going well or not. Well, ultimately, the people who are best positioned to tell you that are those who are actually experiencing the impact. So this is really the topic of the day, how to integrate the voice of affected people and communities into impact reporting. So for that, I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Yewande, who's going to lead us through the rest of the opening keynote.
Thank you, Matt. I'm very happy to be here. And hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Next slide, please. So I'd like to illustrate today's topic with a brief history of modern microfinance. Now, although it had existed for some time, microfinance really took off in the 1980s. Microfinance institutions operated on a non-profit basis with a social mission to provide collateral-free loans to people to start and grow their business. And it gained a lot of success, in fact, providing people with access to credit that they may not otherwise have had access to. It did so well that by the 1990s, the sector expanded and became commercialized. MFIs were charging market rate interest to cover their operating costs and to make profit. And that attracted private capital to the sector, which grew the sector. And it seemed to be a win-win situation because the sector was growing and more people were being reached. However, by the 2000s, the sector started to experience something that we could call a mission drift, where the profit orientation started to overshadow the social mission. There were reports of customers being coerced into taking out loans beyond their means, and the sector was characterized by high loan defaults and over-indebtedness. And it was clear that the focus had shifted away from the consumer. The good news is current day practices in microfinance are improving as institutions are looking for better ways to implement their social mission through set structures and processes. Next slide, please. And so I hope that illustrates that good intentions alone are not enough. And I'd love to pose this question to the audience, because in an impact investing context, what do you think could create negative outcomes, even when our intentions are positive? Feel free to pop your responses in the chat. Don't be shy. What have we got here? Who's going to be the first brave person? Displacement. Interesting. Can you elaborate, Gwendolyn? It's a very interesting one. Any other ideas from anyone? What could create negative outcomes despite our positive intentions? Donor inference. Okay. So does that mean when you're more focused on what the donor wants as opposed to what the beneficiaries want? When you lose sight of your why as an entity, absolutely. Inadequate funding, exactly. When we make assumptions about needs, exactly, without validating them. Misalignment on goals or expected benefits. Keep them coming, keep them coming. There's probably an endless list of things that could potentially cause negative outcomes despite our best intentions. Any other ideas? When the investment is not relying on the community's realities, talents, or capacities. Absolutely. You set up a mill to process smallholder fruit, but you indirectly cause loss of income to informal millers who previously used to mill fruit. Oh, I see. Okay. So it's down to the solution not being the right solution. Lack of expertise. Absolutely. So all of these things, there's an endless number of things, but all of these things essentially characterize impact risks They represent execution risks, alignment risks, stakeholder participation risks. And we know that risks are present in impact investing. But what's really important is that we have the mechanisms to find out about these issues and to respond. And what we're proposing is that engagement and listening are crucial, a crucial tool for this. Thank you. Next slide, please. And so we should continuously listen to the people affected to understand and improve the outcomes they experience. And the impact performance reporting norms defines people affected as individuals or aspects of the natural environment that are significantly affected by an entity's activities, products, or services. And it's true that enterprises have a number of different groups of people that they are accountable to, such as investors, partners, government officials, even regulators. But what we're focusing on here is the people that the investment is intended to benefit. And depending on your business model, that may sound like customers, it may sound like beneficiaries, employees, users, suppliers, target groups, or stakeholders. And what's really important is that we continuously listen to these people, because engagement should not just be a one-off exercise. And I want to draw your attention to the words underlined here. So when we say outcomes, what we mean are the actual well-being that these people experience. Next slide, please. And so if you're not already convinced, here are some of the benefits of engaging with affected people. Firstly, it gives us the best shot at the goal of creating value, both financial value and social value. Listening gives us deep insights into the problems that affected people are experiencing and helps us to create targeted solutions to those problems. It also helps us to achieve other objectives such as product market fit and increased innovation to improve our products and services. Secondly, as we alluded to earlier, it gives us the best opportunity to take corrective action when we've identified any risks to both our impact and the financials. And also, people tend to buy in and commit to solutions when they've had some kind of participation in the design or creation of these solutions. And so it manages the risks that the solution will not be accepted. And finally, it really helps to build trust, because more investors are looking for stronger evidence of the impact that their capital is creating. And when you base your impact report on the voices of the people that are affected, it lends more credibility to the impact claims that you're trying to make. And hopefully the idea is that with more evidence of impact, we'll start to see increased capital flowing towards impactful solutions. Next slide, please. So who does what when it comes to engagement? Well, typically enterprises are best positioned to engage directly because they deliver products and services and they hold relationships often with the people affected. However, with the evolution of the impact investing space, we're really trying to encourage more investors to get involved. And what that looks like is investors potentially monitoring the activities of enterprises and supporting with resources, funding, expertise, technology. Also sometimes taking a lead role in collaboratively setting the engagement objectives with enterprises. Sometimes even investors can engage directly. For example, when there's a particular case of a negative impact, or the investor has a particular interest in the affected people. Sometimes during the due diligence phase, the investor will engage with affected people directly to get a sense of the impact potential of the enterprise. But both investors and enterprises use the data that they get from listening for decision-making within their respective processes. For investors, that would be anything from pre-sourcing to due diligence, investment monitoring and exit. And for enterprises, that would be strategy formulation, design of products and services, and ongoing implementation of strategy and reporting. Next slide, please. And so in engagement, it's not really a one size fits all, and there is a bit of a spectrum when it comes to engaging. And the spectrum outlined here shows increasing depth of engagement, which corresponds with increasing decision-making influence that is afforded to affected people. And so at the left-hand side, we start with informing, where, for example, you can share information with affected people. Then we move on to consultation, where you're gathering feedback from affected people. We move then on to collaboration, where affected people play more of an active role in decision-making. And finally, on to empowering, where affected people have more of a formal decision-making authority. And there isn't a one that's necessarily better than the other. However, it's important to note that if you currently focus mainly on the left-hand side, it's likely that the risk may be higher. So the risk of stakeholder, of a lack of what really matters to stakeholders may be higher. A risk of not understanding what stakeholders value may be higher than if you're at the right-hand side. If you're at the right-hand side, it's more likely that there are higher levels of trust with stakeholders. And it's really up to enterprises and investors to weigh up where they think they are currently on this scale and where they think they should be. So I think this is a really helpful tool for conversations with teams to self-assess. And when it comes to engagement methods, there's a wide variety of ways you can engage, from high touch approaches such as focus groups or interviews, to high-tech approaches such as mobile and video. You can choose to engage directly or through intermediaries. And again, all of these methods will correspond to the objectives of the engagement. So it's really important, as Matt highlighted at the beginning, to know what are your objectives for engagement? What are you trying to learn? What is your budget? What is the context? And then you can match your intention as per the spectrum to your engagement approach. Next slide, please. And so the impact performance reporting norms provides a structure which you can use to create your impact report. And essentially, stakeholder engagement or engaging with affected people should be integrated throughout the whole report. So what that looks like in section 1 could be outlining who your affected people are, what impact you intend to create, and how. In section 2, this is where you would outline your engagement approach. So what methodology you chose, what is your sampling approach, who you've chosen to engage and who you've chosen not to engage, and why. In section 3, this is where you would outline the results, the outcomes as evidenced by the people that you've engaged, both positive and negative. And in section 4, this is where it's really important to highlight how your engagement is filtering into your decision-making and governance structures. So that could look like your investment committee meetings or regular interaction with your investees, and how those learnings from engagement are being translated into changes in strategy. Section 5 is where you bring your engagement to life through case studies and storytelling. And we're going to deep dive into this section next month, so join us then. And section 6 is where, if you've had an independent review, you can outline the results of that review of your engagement process. And just to highlight that Impact Frontiers will soon be publishing an implementation guide to support investors in incorporating the perspectives of affected people into impact performance assessment and reporting. So stick around for that. Next slide, please. And during the creation of this guide, we caught up with Global Partnerships to get a sense of their engagement approach. Global Partnerships is an impact-first fund manager working to create opportunities for people living in poverty. And they have a presence across Africa and Latin America. And they start their process with an evidence-based investment thesis centered on impact for and through end clients. They then proceed to impact due diligence to find out who is being served, what impact is being delivered, and why that impact is going to be, why the impact will be impactful. They then triangulate that between the client, the enterprise, and the sector and country level data to get a more holistic picture of the impact that's been created. And finally, they engage with the social enterprises investees to deepen their understanding of impact performance, and then build the investees' capacity for impact management, including supporting a subset with impact assessments conducted by 60 decibels. And the overall objective of this is to use the client outcomes to refine their strategy, inform their governance, and enhance accountability. Next slide, please. So I think we all agreed that effective engagement should take place, and engagement is a good thing to happen, but there are some constraints. And here we've outlined some of the biggest ones. And primarily, the biggest issue is misaligned incentives. And that really happens when the structures that motivate the parties in the engagement process are not aligned with creating social outcomes for affected people. So, and that could be both at the fund manager level and at the enterprise level. If fund managers are not incentivized by their LPs or asset allocators, then they may not put enough resource or effort into the engagement process. Similarly, if enterprises are not incentivized by their investors, for example, in the case of microfinance, if loan officers are more incentivized by the volumes of loans as opposed to the benefit that those loans will actually deliver to the people that are taking them out, that are taking the loans out, then that creates a bit of friction in terms of the focus and prioritization of people that are delivering the impact. And it's not to say that they're intentionally trying to not create impact, because sometimes people think that that the profit goes hand in hand with impact, and they're basically operating in lockstep. So the more you operate, the more impact that you're creating. Sometimes that is the case, but sometimes it's not the case. And you have to put a lot of focus into making sure that the social outcomes that you're working towards are actually taking place. The next issue is around power dynamics. And what this means is that there's often an imbalance in power between investors, enterprises, and affected people. Investors have money, therefore they have the power. And what that can look like in an engagement situation is where investors set the engagement terms, set the engagement objectives on their own terms without any input from the enterprise or the affected people. So investors will decide, who gets to be engaged, what questions are asked, and what is done with the results. And when there are power dynamics, it really limits the effectiveness of doing any kind of engagement, and it makes it seem to be more of a tokenistic exercise. And the third issue is capacity. So even when intentions are there and the motivation is there, engagement can take a lot of resources, time, finances, skill, and often this is actually what hampers engagement being done at all. Next slide, please. And so I'd love to know from the audience, what's your biggest challenge in integrating the voice of affected people in your assessment or reporting? Is it that you don't see the value of engagement? Is it that leaders or investors don't prioritize engagement? Is it that you want to do it, but you lack the resources, time, budget, or staff? Or is it that you don't know where to start? Or any other option, you can pop it in the chat box, in the responses box. What's your biggest challenge? Do we have the results? Oh, wow. An overwhelming, we want to do it, but lack the resources, time, budget, and staff. Wow. I'm glad to see nobody doesn't see the value of engagement. That's very good. Okay, 14% leadership don't prioritize engagement, and 9% don't know where to start. Well, hopefully we can help you with the last 2 points, and I think that once you start to do engagement and you start to create some value from engaging, the first 2 issues should hopefully resolve over time as leaders and investors start to see the fruits from engagement. And really, the idea is that when you're starting to engage, you do it on a proportionate basis depending on where you are. And we're going to go into a little bit of that in a minute, but it's great to see. Next slide, please. And so to give you a bit of a helping hand with your journey, here's a bit of an overview or a sneak peek into what's going to be coming up in the Impact Frontiers Implementation Guide. So here we've outlined a progressive pathway for when you're starting your engagement process, when you're building, or when you want to optimize. So if you're just starting, the big idea is to take stock of where you are, speak to your investees, find out what engagement they're currently doing, find out who they're engaging, what they're learning, and then engage with your leadership and investors to get a sense of the appetite for engagement. What is the motivation? What are the motivation levels like at the moment? What do they currently think about engagement? And then just start reporting on future plans. What are your aspirations for engagement? Maybe you've had a look at the spectrum and you feel that you're aiming towards a higher level of engagement. That's really helpful information to report when you're just starting. And if you're building, it's really about establishing systems and processes to start to get your engagement more formalized. It's great to define your engagement objectives, the who, the what, the why, and start considering those challenges that we discussed around the incentives, power dynamics, and capacity, making sure that the resources are appropriately allocated to your ambition is going to be critical. And then you can just start reporting on what you're learning, both the positive and the negative. And as you start to optimize and look to strengthen and embed your process, hopefully you'll start to see the value from engagement and leaders will start to allocate more resources. And then you can start reporting on how your learnings are being integrated into your decision-making and how that's changing your investment approach. And above all, keep inquiring, keep looking to improve your processes. You can always get better. Next slide, please. So I'd love to know, where are you on your engagement journey? Are you starting, just taking stock, having those early conversations? Do you feel you're building? Are you putting systems and processes in place? Or are you optimizing, strengthening, and embedding? Or other? Where do you think you are? Is the poll up? Can everyone see the poll? There is no poll. There should be a poll. Okay, should we use the chat instead? I can see lots of threes. I can see a couple of ones. Looks like there's more threes. I'd love to hear from some of you that are optimizing. I think that the threes have it. Wow, that's very, very impressive. maybe we can, in the Q&A, have a couple of people just chat about their process. Wonderful. Okay, next slide, please. So I'd love to leave you with a few takeaways. Here are my top 5 tips. Number 1 is get started today. Whether you're just starting, whether you're building, whether you're optimizing, keep going. I remember, focus on the actual outcomes that people are experiencing. Number 3 is be collaborative and share power. That's really important. Number 4, use engagement for decisions, not just collecting data. And number 5, keep learning and improving. This is a learning exercise. And above all, good luck. Thank you.
Oh, that was so nice, Yewande, and thank you so much to the audience for being engaged on chat. Remember, you also have an opportunity to also engage with the Q&A, and the Q&A is the 4th button on your bottom right corner. And I think Yewande has really recapped what you have learned, but just something about what you have learned today is that you put forth questions. I think one of the key things I've been able to pick out is in terms of the entire continuum of how you engage, at what point do you inform, how do you consult, how do you collaborate, but we are always moving to the very tail end process of deferring or empowerment. And for those who have done work around citizen accountability, I think we are always moving towards empowerment and us hearing them more. Something to look forward to, I think impact reporting has mentioned something about having an implementation guide. So definitely something to keep on looking forward to, and as well as our follow-up sessions around how do you do case studies and how do you do independent verification. And talking of case studies, we are now at the point to hear from what the players in the field are doing. We have Kuselwa from Trevor Noah Foundation, who is taking us in the next session, and really looking forward to hearing all the good work that Trevor Noah Foundation is doing. Most welcome, Kuselwa.
Thank you so much, Samuel. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be part of this timely conversation through this impact series, and looking forward to take you through the case study in terms of the grounds that Yewande have actually set about integrating voices of the affected. So I'm very happy to be part of this conversation. Please move to the next slide. Awesome. So I was very excited when I learned about this session in particular, because centering impact reports on the voices of the affected communities resonates so much with our organizational values at Trevor Noah Foundation, and our values of designing and delivering human-centered programs, solving together and doing good in the pursuit of our mission. So beyond just ensuring that our impact truly reflects the voices of the affected stakeholders, we prioritize ensuring that in the process they are seen and treated as valued stakeholders with equal ownership of the investment, as well as ownership of the sustainability of that impact that we are hoping to achieve. So my presentation today will be demonstrating on how we've done that, drawing examples as well as practices from how we implemented the Faranani infrastructure project. You can move to the next slide, please. So without any further ado, I would like to jump straight into the case study presentation. So the Faranani infrastructure project was launched in 2021 in partnership with Youth Build South Africa. It is part of the Khulani Nathi Khulani Schools program, which is a Trevor Noah Foundation's flagship program implemented across 19 schools in Johannesburg, South Africa. The goal of this program is to increase equitable access to quality education. So the FIP project, which is, it's in short, it's Faranani in FIP is an acronym for Faranani Infrastructure Project, and throughout the presentation, I might use the terms interchangeably. So the FIP project was set out to address two agent challenges that is quite common across many township schools in South Africa. The first being unsafe and crumbling infrastructure in public schools. And the second challenge that we looked at addressing, it's the high levels of unemployed youth in the townships we work with. So from the start, FIP aimed for a triple win, and we had like 3 goals: improving schools infrastructure, upskilling young people in the communities we work with, and also strengthening ties between schools and the communities. So what actually made a FIP a distinctive approach or an innovative solution? It was set out as a community asset building investment, and it is an investment that counted on a variety of community stakeholders as part of a collective action. So it wasn't just something that the Trevor Noah Foundation and Youth Build South Africa wanted to carry from the beginning to the end. We counted on the voices of the affected literally to be part of the process. Please move to the next slide. So with that in mind, as I said, FIP relied on the affected stakeholders to become invested in the process. This demanded the investment as well as the project design to employ models that facilitate the integration of community voices. As a result, the design of the project was grounded on 3 frameworks that enabled those community voices to be well integrated. So the first framework is community asset building. With the community asset building, it is a model of our partner, Youth Build, and it has been used across the world to make community infrastructure an agenda of young people to become change agents in terms of transforming their own communities. So in the case of the Faranani Infrastructure Project, schools become a shared community asset, and young people from the communities are placed as change agents or as co-investors in the process of transforming schools infrastructure. The second framework that the design is grounded on, it's impact management and measurement. This makes impact measuring and reporting to become an engine of project management cycle. So as we invested in this project, our design always had an impact as the end goal. Integrating voices of the affected was not considered then an add-on. It was something that was very instrumental for the success of the project. We see the affected stakeholders as the primary voice in terms of defining and validating the impact. And we believe by that it actually strengthens the validity of our impact narrative. So another framework that we used is asset-based storytelling or asset-based reporting. This is a reporting and a communication approach that frames the affected stakeholders by their strengths, by their sense of agency, by the leadership they contribute in terms of the project success, in terms of instead of defining them as their vulnerability points or the needs that the project is actually there to close. So we all know in the traditional reporting, there is a tendency of often positioning affected stakeholders as passive beneficiaries, and also just positioning investors or fund managers as heroes. So with this model of applying asset-based storytelling, we flipped the script in the way we report, in the way we communicate about on the positions as well, on the impact narrative of the affected voices. We position the stakeholders as valued contributors. We position them as core investors in the change process. We see their bold actions, not the vulnerability that they have. So from this image that you can see actually from the screen, it is an image with a pledge of FIP participants. And from the pledge that the pledges that they make at the beginning of the project, you can see that they already have a sense of agency, a sense of ownership, and they see themselves as well as contributing to the investment that is being made in the community. They see themselves as main actors in driving the change. We are all trying to contribute to, and they are already contributing to the impact narrative that we use in terms of defining success of this investment. So you can move to the next slide, please. So from the frameworks that I've presented, I will share a few practical examples of how they are applied in different stages of the impact management chain that I talked about it, and how in that application they constantly integrated community voices. So as you can see, FIP was not designed and implemented for school or the communities we worked with. Instead, it was co-designed with them. They were part of the design. They informed, the process through. So as much as the Trevor Noah Foundation and Youth Build South Africa came up with this innovative solution, it was critical for its success to be further defined with the schools, with the communities, with the young people. So we, through a participatory and consultative implementation approach, we integrated the affected voices by, starting. We integrated the voices of the affected not only at the point of reporting, they started to own the impact narrative at the design and the implementation stages. For example, we organized community consultations through town hall meetings, including the participations of school management teams, school governing bodies, parents, counselors, and the youth groups from the community. Schools were at the center of recruiting the young people that were going to be doing the refurbishments in the school. And they were also part of defining as well as validating the scope of the infrastructure refurbishments that were going to be conducted. We involved local businesses as suppliers of building materials, and participants themselves even named the project Faranani Infrastructure Project, which meant working together in one of our local languages. So all of these efforts meant that community stakeholders became invested in shaping the impact narrative right from the beginning. It was not at the reporting stage where now we started to think about how do we capture their voices. They were very invested in the narrative right from the beginning. So by the time we were reaching reporting, their voices are already owning the narrative. They're already owning the change. They're the ones that actually have to kind of like really confirm and validate that this is the benefit that we are getting from their own perspective. So and then just to touch, of course, we face challenges as we work in communities. Community dynamics vary. Local politics sometimes create tensions. We encounter sometimes a culture of entitlement and a belief that there's more to get out of the Trevor Noah Foundation because obviously this is Trevor's money, or this is Trevor owes us. But I think working with continuing to work with with community allies, they actually become part of the solutions in terms of navigating those challenges. And we are also quite transparent about TNFs, like the Trevor Noah Foundation source of funding, and the different players that actually contribute in terms of investing to the projects that we work on on the ground. Please move to the next slide. So Now, getting to the main point of centering voices of the affected in impact reporting, because voices of the community stakeholders, the affected, the participants, the schools, as well as all the different stakeholders on the ground that were already embedded throughout our impact management chain. They're already embedded in the design, they're already embedded or integrated through the implementation. Integrating them in impact reporting narrative becomes kind of really organic for us, especially for this project. By the time we get to really compile reports, or we get to you compile an impact story, we already have the stakeholders fully invested and fully owning the narrative of the impact that we know that, you know, our impact management chain is actually looking at consolidating. And I think also all stakeholders on the ground matter for us in terms of validating and confirming that impact from their perspective. So for us to ensure that they actually know they matter, it means our data collection and impact harvesting tools, they have to be accessible and they have to enable them to tell the story from their perspective. And one example of that, it was when we were conducting the impact case study, we had learners expressing change and the impact they've experienced from this investment through drawings where they really demonstrated how the newly built soup kitchen in their school have changed their eating experience. And then another example is how we used computer-assisted telephonic interviews instead of just basic surveys for young people, because young people are dynamic, young people are mobile, they move all the time, numbers change, emails get changed, or they lose passwords to access them. So by calling them directly through our community liaison officers and who are still part of the WhatsApp groups that were formed when the project started, it ensured that we had the most reliable way of capturing their voices and ensured that their experiences still shaped the impact narrative. So as a result, we had young people for this impact study, giving us, I think, impact perspectives that we have never even considered at the beginning when we were designing the logic frameworks for the project as part of the long-term outcomes of the project. Young people validating that being part of the project unlocked motivation for them to study further. We've always seen this as like an infrastructure or technical skills second chance project, but to actually see that there's a greater impact than what we're able to directly deliver from the project, it was really great to learn. And earlier I also mentioned that we use asset-based storytelling as one of the frameworks for reporting and communications, and I will share a little bit more about how we apply that here. With this approach, we again try to portray the affected voices, and in this case, young people, in a way that it instead of portraying them as unemployed and vulnerability or lacking impact, lacking income and waiting for rescue. Instead, we profile them as builders of their former schools. We profile them as role models to the learners in which are still attending the schools where the refurbishments were done. We profile them as graduates and entrepreneurs who invest in their own community infrastructure, and in this case, a school being that asset that is shared by the community. And an example of that is what I've provided, what I've shared on the screen. A story that we once profiled through our social media, a young woman who gained plumbing and carpentry skills and broke gender stereotypes and also overcame disability limitations by participating in this project. So even though there are there are many challenges and difficulties that this particular participant could face and actually experienced through her participation in the project. We did not profile her as those. Instead, we highlighted her resilience, we highlight her leadership, we highlight the contributions she made to the success of the project. So that is one example of how we go about, applying this framework in telling the story of the affected from a place where they are portrayed as as contributing strengths in the implementation. Please move to the next slide. So what did we learn from FIP in terms of lessons on centering voices in voices of the affected in impact reporting? Firstly, voices of the affected stakeholders must be embedded throughout the impact management chain, not just at the reporting stage. That approach has really worked well for us. And we find that if the community stakeholders already are already invested in terms of shaping the impact, they want to tell the impact from their perspective. They want to tell their story from their perspective. So secondly, in impact investing, we have a tendency of treating affected stakeholders as passive beneficiaries, and yet these are stakeholders needed the most to for the investment or the project to succeed. They invest their time, labor, local knowledge, and social capital that makes the project sustainable beyond the time of implementation. We need to start treating them with value and dignity and as co-investors in the project, as opposed to just passive beneficiaries. And the third lesson that I have pulled out is that investors and fund managers should not be the main character in impact reporting. We need to let the individuals and communities to shape their impact narrative. Our role is to set up frameworks, allocate funds in our budgeting that enable them to actually have a voice when it comes to that impact harvesting. And why does this matter? Because impact is more accurate, rigorous, and trustworthy when it is defined and validated by those that actually experienced it. So from an impact management perspective, the lesson is clear. When an impact management strategy places affected voices at the center, it doesn't just strengthen inclusion. It produces a stronger and credible report that investors and communities themselves can actually trust, because it reflects the reality, the true results, or the true impact that has happened. And I've also shared a few practical ways to integrate stakeholder voice from tools like the computer-assisted telephonic interviews, engaging young participants, obviously if they're underage, instead of having focus group or interviews with them. Maybe they can, conduct drawings. They can define the impact in the way that they are best comfortable with defining or validating it. There's also storytelling and I think compilation of impact videos. And finally, all this, for it to work, actually, it must be done under the principle of really human-centered programming, solving together and understanding that investments or projects that are going to communities, we not save as impact as fund managers. Instead, we need to work with communities. We need to work with the affected to kind of like really come up with solutions that really speak to what they experience. So thank you so much for listening. I am looking forward to further interaction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kuselwa. I think really interesting hearing you telling stories from the ground, from Trevor Noah Foundation. And I think one of the key things that you have been always saying in this webinar series is you've been locally rooted and globally informed. And I think that really came well when you started off, even from key things like having the participants naming whatever project that you're working on, Fararani, meaning working together. And for those of us who are from various African communities, you know what naming means. Naming is the essence of ownership. It can be named from a process, from our experience, from the past, from an aspiration of the future. But also at the same time, you have also married that with the emerging use of technology, using the meta tools that are currently available for us to be able to use. And I think this is very interesting, especially when you say that we should have our communities as the key players, as the key people who are telling the stories. And I can't really emphasize the aspect of storytelling more than that of the analogy of the hunter, why the hunter always keeps on telling the stories, and one day what will happen when the lion is the one that is meant to tell the story. So as we keep on telling the Pan-African story, I want to welcome you really to engage on the question and answer session. Our speakers are on standby. Matt, Yawanda, Kuselwa, please engage with the Q&A session as participants, and you'll be able to answer. Allow me now to leave over to Pan-African Level, FSD Africa, playing in that social impact investing space. And I have on board with us Ryan. So Ryan, over to you for your introduction. And
Sure. Thank you for having me. I think this is a very good opportunity. It's such a great platform to be sharing, the stories that we get from the field and how this plays out in our overall impact measurement and how we tell the story of what our investments out there are doing. So yeah, very briefly, my name is Ryan Mwanzui, Head Development Impact within FSD Africa, which is a specialist development agency operating in over 30 countries, trying to, make finance work for Africans' future. So I think part of the things that we do is try to make sure that, we support the mobilization of, more private capital and making sure, again, that capital is deployed in where it's required the most. That is trying to change the lives of the Africans who live within this continent. Next slide, please. I think that's just an outline. So maybe we could just go into maybe the other slide. Maybe one more slide. I think this is more of what we do. Yeah. So I think just by starting here, just by glance, the things that we do at FSD, I've already mentioned that we are working in over 30 countries across the continent, and our work really spans in two main areas. Of course, we have the grant, the TS side, and then we also do have an investment component where we do invest in different kind of platforms, through intermediaries, through funds and financial institutions, to make sure that we mobilize more private capital and get it deployed into the areas where it matters the most. So in terms of what we do in terms of the impact, probably could move to the next slide. Great. So our purpose is to make finance work for Africa's future. And how we look at this is through creating economic opportunities and trying also to make sure that environmental benefits are delivered, and then trying to also address the fragility and vulnerability of the people that we do care about. So I think this topic comes in very handy, looking at our purpose. At the end of the day, we do care about the impact through the people who live within the continent and also the planet itself. So how you can tell the story of your impact without necessarily listening to the people that you care about. So when you talk about economic opportunities, you're creating jobs, you're increasing the productive assets of the same group. How do you want to tell their story then without listening to them? So that's why we felt as an organization that we need to move beyond the numbers to tell the story of the people that we are out to change their lives. So next slide, please. Great. So a very simple question here is that whether the numbers were enough. And the answer is, of course, from those who have spoken before me, we've all agreed that numbers are never enough. You can never tell your impact story just based on the numbers. You have to put some human aspect to it. So most of our impact reports out there are mostly on a very quantitative and based on some very rigid results frameworks such as a log frame for those who are familiar with FCDO kind of, reporting. So log frames are very, rigid. They tell the story of numbers. And again, that does not necessarily give you an opportunity to tell the bigger picture beyond those numbers. So there's always an opportunity for us to be able to put that human aspect of the stories that we are trying to report out there. So that's why we felt, I think, such kind of an opportunity to go out there, collect and listen to the voices from the affected communities makes sense, and basically adds on to what exactly we want to report in terms of the numbers. Next slide, please. Great. So we do refer them to as voices from the field, which is more or less what we are discussing today, which is centering impact around the voice of the affected communities. So this is a very collaborative approach of storytelling technique, where we want to tell the nuances of the stories that you want to have, or that we've had, especially around different communities within the work that we do. So the why is very clear. It's because we want to make sure that there's an opportunity to verify, evaluate, and tell the story of the work that you've actually done. Then also to understand the perspective of the people targeted. I think Casero was very, spot on, where she was talking about, it's good to listen to those people. When you're co-creating all these projects, you need to have them on board. They need to have their voice on the kind of things that you're going to tackle. So for us, we feel that voices from the field is very key, because you're telling the story, the impact story, from the perspective of the people affected. So I think it's a timely discussion. It's a very, important aspect of, telling the impact story. So for instance, I think Sam, you started off by giving a very good analogy, about, the African communities and, cultures where people go into fetch water and, that kind of a thing. For me, I was just looking at, sometimes when people ask me, what do you do, Ryan? It becomes a very hard question to sometimes answer, just like that, especially if you're responding that to your grandma. For instance, they ask you, what do you do? Imagine me going back and telling them that, yeah, we work to make finance work for Africa's future. Becomes very, like you've said so much but said nothing to them. So I think you need to have a better way of telling the story of the things that you do to make it sense for, layman people out there. So I think for us, stories can be, sometimes the impact that we have can be very complex, but when you put story into it, sort of gives it a bit of some form. So I think for us, this is a very useful aspect of how we do report our impact. So a bit of the process. So one of the things that, again, we do when we are telling these stories is that we have to make sure that we involve all the stakeholders involved in that particular value chain. So like I've mentioned, we do invest through different platforms, through intermediaries, through funds, financial institutions, direct companies. And for you to tell a complete story, you have to take care of all those different stakeholders. So we tell this story in a very multi-phase kind of levels. One of them is at the institutional level. We have to tell the story from the market system level. So speaking to different partners who are playing with that within that space to also understand what exactly is happening, and also to make sure that the impact that you're reporting in a way has stemmed from the things that you've been able to do in the market. So of course, not to to claim or to over attribute whatever it is to yourself, because a very tough question to say that this has happened because we put in money into that particular sector, but trying to understand your influence into that kind of change. You can never do that until you speak to the entire stakeholders, or at least a sample of stakeholders within that particular chain, to understand what your influence has been. And lastly, and the most important part of this, is listening to the clients themselves, the end users. So how do they perceive the things that we do, and how have they really made their lives better through the investments that we will have done over the period through our implementation. Next slide, please. Yeah, a bit of the process. So how we look at this is in three main areas. One of them is the pre-data collection, then the collection stage itself, and then of course the post stage. So the pre is where you are getting to first select which stories you want to collect, because like I've mentioned, we are in so many other countries across Africa and our portfolio is quite huge. So you have to come up with a criteria. How do you narrow down to a certain story for that particular reporting period? So this happens actually annually, how we do it from our end. So we usually do have our impact report every year towards the calendar year. So starting off from around September, we are now beginning the process, and it runs all the way to around November there. So all this data collection and the stories happen during that time. So the selection of those impact stories happen during that time. So we have to look at what is the theme for this year in our impact report, and that will inform the kind of stories that we will go out and collect. The other thing is the maturity of the investments or the projects that you are implementing. You have to make sure that that story is going to be rich in terms of what you want to tell out there. So if an investment just started, there will be very minimal to tell. Or if you go and tell that story, it may not necessarily be because of our influence, but maybe other kind of factors out there. Then of course the actual data collection, which is again it's very heavy, and I'll be discussing that shortly in my next slide around the challenges. So there's a lot of work that is actually involved. So what we say is that we have to meet them, the real voices and real people. So you have to listen to them, you have to talk to them. And our funders, mainly FCTU, have been very interested in how these stories happen, and mostly they usually join us in these visits when we go meet our clients out there. They are usually part of that discussion because they also want to meet the real voices, the real people, to hear that story from the ground. So it's always a very good opportunity for us to also showcase to them that the things that we do report on our dashboards, all these numbers that we are always reporting, there's actually a person behind that kind of impact. So that is basically why we tag them along. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is just an example, and there are a couple of other examples that I've already shared with the team, and they can share with the rest of the participants. Because of time, we may not necessarily go through all this. So through our investment arm, we've invested in a company called Persistent Energy Capital that basically supports early stage ventures or businesses across the continent. And they've invested in a company called Solar Taxi that does electric vehicles, both two-wheeler, three-wheeler, and now they've also ventured into four-wheelers. So one of the key interesting things that I've picked this kind of a story is the kind of voices that we had. I was part of this group that went to Ghana to collect this data, and listening to these people. Going into that plant, one of the things that we were amazed to find is that 70% of the engineers, 70% of their workforce is actually the engineers themselves. And going now to the actual factory, 90%, was astonishing, 90% of those engineers were women. You can imagine. I actually have some photos of these women trying to assemble these three-wheelers or all these vehicles, and it was quite an amazing story. So these things we do, and we get the stories to hear. We tend to hear from the actual people. So we spoke with one of the ladies, and her name is Gifty, and she told us that sometimes she's usually amazed by how people have perceived the engineering industry. It's a male-dominated kind of a space, but what Solar Taxi did is that it's changed the landscape. They've actually 90% of those being women, and it is such a powerful story. And I've shared some of the links to look at the full story, the photos, and all that. These are some of the things that we do get when we go out there in the field. So on the left, you can already see some of the numbers that we were able to gather from that. But what came out of that is listening to the story of these women whose lives have been changed. They've given the opportunity to work in that particular sector, in a particular area that is considered male, space. So that was a very powerful story. So next slide, please. Yeah, a bit of some challenges because of time. So there's a lot of coordination that is usually involved. And like I've mentioned, we usually do talk to so many other stakeholders, all the way from the partners, university companies, downstream. There are so many other players out there. So trying to coordinate all that sometimes can be a bit of some headache. And then also we work with businesses. So sometimes if things are not necessarily working well, they see these as an advertising opportunity for them. So how do you balance telling a story of what is not working versus them being able to advertise their business? So you have to really, strike a balance around that. So that's again a challenge that we've always encountered. So again, trying to make sure that there's an aspect of value for money, because it's a very costly affair. And part of the description that Yewande was talking about is that it's a very heavy resource kind of process, all through from the time to the resources that are involved. You have to make sure that there is a good balance, trying to make sure that value for money is actually assured. The impact that you're telling, the stories that you're doing, are they really going to add value? Do you come back with value that is able to make you even shape future investments or projects better? So for you have to make sure that whatever is coming out of that, it's something that can be used in future, just alongside telling your impact story and blowing your own trumpet on the things that you've done. What value does it add again? So that's again a very huge aspect to consider. So those are some of the key things that we've seen as challenges. There is also something around, we do take videos, we do take pictures, but there are people who will tell you that they don't want to be showcased out there, especially when you talk about government officials, different kind of stakeholders. So because these reports that we do collect are always out there. So we have dissemination channels, we have our website that we do post all these reports out there. There are some people whose stories don't want to be published, or maybe a company that is doing exemplary well in terms of margins or profits. They don't want to be probably advertised out there. So there's a lot of sensitive information sometimes that some of the stakeholders are not necessarily willing to have it out there in the public. That's another key challenge that we've always encountered when you're doing these voices from the field. A bit of some reflections. Next slide. Yeah, I think most of these are from Yewande's presentation. She had covered most of this. These are some of the questions that she had basically asked you. So one of the things is that whether you've been able to use this approach before, what has been your experience, it will be good to hear. I've seen already some of those comments in the chat. And then one of the key things, and I would leave it to you to as a takeaway, is it is always very important to institutionalize this approach, making sure that it's part of your impact measurement and process and management. So unless you get to that point, I think it's going to be a one-off thing. It shouldn't. And I think Kaselo also mentioned that has to be incorporated actually all the way from the start and across the entire value chain of that impact cycle. So it's not something that you just you stamp upon, but something you need to deliberately plan for. You need to always incorporate getting voice from the field to make sure that it is shaping your future programming. So I think those are some of the key reflections that I would want to leave you with. And of course, the next slide provides is a couple of examples from other, I had selected a few other stories that you could go and read at your own time. I may not necessarily go into details of those, given we only have 10 minutes remaining. So those are some of the things in terms of the processes, the how we've gone about it, and why we felt it was first very useful for us, and how it has shaped our impact stories. going forward. I'll stop there and hand it back to the team. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ryan. And I think one of the interesting thing I'm thinking is I really used to think a lot about what to tell my 7-year-old in terms of what I do. I think right now I'll now do the honors because my grandmother has been telling me a lot of stories when I was young. So it's me now to go back and tell her the story of what I'm doing. So at this point, I want just to come to the question and answer session. And as I quickly open that up, I want to find out that we have the Q&A session open, but also at the same time, there are some questions that came up during the time of the registration. And Matt, I want you to quickly pick up. There was an aspect where Ryan discussed around the aspect of using data. I know so Kusela mentioned the same around using meta tools. So how do we balance around the whereby our communities now are feeling there's a lot of use of data mining? So they are feeling they are giving us these stories to be able not to be used ethically. And also at the same time, we're also faced with a challenge of telling them, please share more about what we do. So I think that's one of the questions that came up. So Matt, you can pick that up and just outline because I believe the participants might be in this audience. Yeah.
Happy to. It's such an important point. But to be honest, I'd be really interested if fellow panelists, presenters, and anyone in the room has a good response and a good idea about how to deal with this, because I think it is a reality. I'd say one thing that we've heard is it's often really important to close the feedback loop, that we often ask for people's perspectives, but then don't say, well, great, thanks. Here's how we've used that perspective or your voice to make decisions, and here's what we've done differently. So really feeding back how the data collected from people, the voice was actually used, because that can be empowering rather than extractive ultimately, and lead people not to feel they're just providing a lot of data that goes into, you know, the ether, but is never used for actual decision making. So that's one thing we've heard, but would love to hear from others if there are good and potentially bad practices out there to learn from.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, Matt. And one of the things that, I think, Samuel, that's a real challenge and a risk out there, and with all these data protection kind of, policies out there. One of the things that we've done from our end is that we make this a very collaborative approach. And the data that we get before it's actually published, we also go back to, the partners who provided these to make sure that they're also comfortable. So we will not necessarily publish anything that they've not actually okayed. Or when you're doing this dissemination, either through different conferences and we are launching our impact report, whoever we've actually mentioned, we always seek their consent. And before seeking their consent, they also have to see what kind of information is really going to be published out there about their company, about their business, about their fund and stuff like that. So that in a way makes them comfortable. And again, it's of course from a very good place that we collect these data. It's also good for them to also understand that from the get-go, that why we are doing this is not necessarily to blow our own trumpet, is not to say that we are doing great work, but to showcase that together with them as as partners, there's a lot that we are doing within the continent, and the stories that are coming out of that are also as part of their successes as well. So they have to get a buy-in all the way from at the get-go, meaning that whatever comes out of that is not necessarily FSD Africa's kind of content, rather a shared kind of effort.
I would also add to be
Yewande, yeah.
Yes.
Please proceed, Yewande.
I would also add to be strategic with the information that you're collecting. So collect only what you need for decision making. If your audience can see that there is logic behind what you're asking for, it gives you more credibility to ask for that information. So be strategic, know your why, and you can do anyhow, basically. Start with why.
Can I come in?
Kusela, please,
Yes,
Kusela.
okay. Thank you. No, I think the point I wanted to make actually is very related to what Yewande just mentioned. And to what I actually usually say about storytelling is that we tend to forget the monitoring data that we've been collecting throughout I think the project phase, the implementation phase. And when we want to now tell a story, we want to start from scratch and going to get information that we are already sitting or data that we're already sitting with. But if we actually use what we have and determine where do we actually have gaps and only engage the stakeholders to kind of like really close the gaps in the story that you kind of like really clear in terms of what do you want to tell, how do you want to tell it, how does their additional insight come to complete what you already have in place. So I think not engaging for the sake of like, okay, we just going there, we want to hear your story, but what do you want to hear and be, because I think data collection fatigue is quite a thing, and it can be exhausting all the time. You have, like, I think starting from scratch and always looking to ask the communities the same information they feel like they've been providing throughout the implementation of the project or the investment. So thank you so much. I just wanted to add that.
Thank you so much for that. I see Olga Atela, you have something to say, so I'll allow you to just pick that up. I think, Olga, you can be unmuted to just speak. Then from there, I'll tell you. Yes, please proceed.
I have two questions for you. Have you ever faced cases where a company comes in any case for defamation? And number two, in Kenya, most people, they don't believe in just giving out data just like that. You have to give them something, like incentives. Are you going to give them something in order to provide the data? So those are my two questions. The first question was somebody coming in, maybe in case of you talked something about their company, or you've published a data, maybe, and then they take you for defamation. And then the next one was giving out incentives in order to access the data. So in Kenya, I know most people do not just give out the data the way you want. You have to give in something in order for you to access their data. Thank you so much. And in that case, what do you do and how do you approach it? Thank you so much.
So thank you. I see Nasri, your hand is up. I think you can pick up the question. Nasri is our director in charge of impact. So most welcome as you take that.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Olga, for the question. It's when we talk about data collection, we always assume that there is an understanding from the perspective of those giving us the data, and they understand what it is we're going to use the data for. So I think that's a very critical step, and it's exactly what Yewande was alluding to. There is a process of engagement with those that you're collecting the data from, for them to understand why you will be using the data and in what form and in what forums. So consents to data use during the data collection period are ways and very simple mechanisms to ensure that as an organization you're protected at the point where someone may come back and say, actually, I didn't want you to say this, but that was the actual case. That's what the data suggested. So I would say that you start by first socializing, all these individuals and organizations that you're working with around what is this data going to be used for, what is the kind of outputs that they're going to use. And a very critical element and a good protection and good practice is also to get consents in the course of the data collection to ensure that you don't face that sort of backlash thereafter. And this is the same approach, I would say, for those who are seeking incentives to provide the data. If you see somebody pushing back, it's because they don't see the value of offering you the data. You're not offering them value in the final report, perhaps, or they don't see that data as a critical agent to their understanding of how they want to continue to run their enterprise, or how they should look out for funders, or how they need to position their strategy going forward. So you have to have a, if I could use this term, a so what element to your work as you're collecting the data. People want to know, and then where will my data go? Where will it sit? So if you want this for me for free and I'm never going to see you again, I'm never going to use it again, that's when incentives start to creep in. So you have to offer the value proposition for them at the beginning when you're explaining what it is that you need the data for. So the approach, you asked how would you approach all of this, is keep it simple. Keep the asks strategic. Think about what you want this data to inform, not just for yourself, but if you're working within communities or within a wider pool or wider ecosystem, is how can you elevate this data to serve a wider need? And then that's how you get better engagement from all of those. So the rest of the colleagues can also chime in. Thank you.
Okay, I believe that's well answered. Nasri, thank you so much. So I think there are two key things I want to just pick up as we come to the very tail end. Sorry about that. So number one is that we, as AVPA, we are doing a data collection around your experiences around impact management and measurement. So we are going to just drop it in chat. And then number two, even as that data collection request is being put on the chat, there was a question from the audience of what inspired each and every one of these speakers to do what they are doing today. I don't want to answer that question because I want to flip it over to Nasri, because you'll be able to meet these speakers in person and you really engage with them over and above what they are doing and what is inspiring them. So Nasri, maybe you can tell the audience to know where are they going to engage with these speakers and where are they going to hear about the speakers' inspirations for today? Please take it up.
Okay. Thank you, Sam. So we are very humbled that the majority of the speakers that you see on the screen, we're going to convert Ryan as well to one of those who are coming to the AVPA conference in November from the 3rd to the 5th. That's going to be Nairobi, Kenya. So if you found this session to be interesting, useful, provocative, and hopefully inspiring, we're going to have many more sessions like this, ranging not just around impact, but what can we do to future-proof Africa? What are the investments that we need to see? What are the innovations that we need to have so that we can be a bit more self-sufficient and resilient as we look towards the future of Africa? We will be convening DFIs, lending partners, governments, funds of funds, family offices, fund managers, and lots of people whose spirit is really about how can we make Africa, the shining light of the world, because we really do have a lot of solutions and a lot of best practice. And so this conference is really a platform of that. It's a platform for African excellence. The information is in the chat. We look forward to welcoming you in November. So if you want to engage in person, in live and living color with your panelists, feel free to use the link. We are offering you a 10% discount because that's how much we want you to come. And it's on the screen. So please claim your discount. And there's a link that has been popped into the chat that you can use to be able to fulfill that purchase of your ticket. So we look forward to seeing you, and we hope that you found today's session useful. Back to you, Sam.
So thank you so much for today. Vivian, I think you can speak to the question you are raising, even as I welcome you to participate in the last poll of this session today. So Vivian, please unmute and speak, and for the rest of the participants, you can participate in our last webinar poll for the day. Please.
Thanks, Samuel. Thanks, Nasri. Today's session was really, really insightful. And I lack words. I think mine was just a quick clarification. Will this recording be shared in case we want to go through the material again?
Yes, the material will be shared, and the recordings, including recordings of our previous session. So please, you'll be able to receive that on your email right after this. and also at the same time an invitation to the last of the series, which is on October, and the first Thursday of the month before you join us physically for the conference. So really thank you, and I just want to ask you to participate in this last poll as we wind down the last bit of the conference. And at this point, Matt, can I allow you to just close out as we finish up? Matt, please.
Just to say thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating, for our guest presenters for sharing their experiences, and very excited about the 4th webinar on case studies coming up next month, and also, as Nazia was mentioning, the summit as well. So I hope to get a chance to meet many of you in person.